You're scrolling through comments on a video. At first, you think the creator made a great point. Then you open the comments. Hundreds of people disagree. Suddenly, your confidence starts leaking out of you. You haven't learned any new facts. Nobody presented a better argument. But somehow, your opinion feels shakier. Why does everyone else's certainty make you doubt your own? If that feeling sounds familiar, congratulations. You're exactly the kind of human being psychologists expected to find. Because the urge to look around and ask, wait, am I the only one seeing this? Isn't a flaw in your thinking. It's one of the oldest survival features your brain has. We're going back to the 1950s, into a small psychology lab where a researcher asked people an absurdly simple question. The answer was obvious, and yet what happened next changed how we understand conformity forever. Then we'll follow that discovery out of the lab and into modern social platforms where the same psychological force quietly shapes what you believe, what you share, and sometimes even what you think you think. The year is 1951. The world is still processing the aftermath of World War II. Psychologists are asking uncomfortable questions about human behavior. How do ordinary people end up agreeing with things that seem obviously wrong, like nuclear attack? Why do groups have so much power over individuals? One researcher couldn't stop thinking about it. His name was Solomon Asch. Unlike many psychologists of his era, Asch wasn't fascinated by rats, puzzles, or laboratory gadgets. He was fascinated by social pressure, the invisible force that seems to bend people's judgments without them even noticing. And here's where it gets strange. Most psychologists at the time believed people would trust their own eyes when the answer was obvious. Asch wasn't so sure, so he designed an experiment to find out. Participants arrived at Asch's laboratory and sat in a room with several other people. What they didn't know was that almost everyone else in the room worked for the experiment. They weren't participants. They were actors. The task looked almost laughably simple. On one card was a single line. On another card were 3 comparison lines labeled A, B, and C. One line clearly matched the original. The others clearly didn't. This wasn't a difficult judgment call. It was the visual equivalent of asking someone whether a banana is longer than a grape. Participants took turns answering aloud. At first, everyone gave the correct answer. The room felt normal, safe, predictable, but the experiment didn't end there, and what came next is where it gets genuinely unsettling. On certain rounds, every actor in the room suddenly gave the same wrong answer. Not a slightly wrong answer. An obviously wrong answer. Imagine looking at a ruler that's clearly 10 inches long, while everyone around you confidently insists it's 4. The real participants sat near the end of the line. They heard one wrong answer, then another, then another, then another. By the time their turn arrived, the room had effectively voted against reality. So what did they do? Many participants abandoned the evidence of their own eyes and repeated the group's answer. Not because they were confused, not because they couldn't see, because they were alone. Some later admitted they knew the group was wrong, but went along anyway. And some actually started doubting themselves. They wondered if everyone else was seeing something they weren't. That's the part that shocked Asch. The pressure wasn't coming from authority. There were no threats, no rewards, no punishments. Just a room full of people agreeing with one another. And somehow, that was enough. The results became famous. Across the experiment, roughly 75% of participants conformed at least once. Only about 25% consistently resisted the group. Think about that for a second. 3 out of 4 people looked at an obviously incorrect answer and, at least once, chose social agreement over their own judgment. Asch concluded that human beings don't simply use groups for information. Groups shape perception itself. Social consensus acts like gravity. Even when you know where you want to stand, you can still feel yourself being pulled. Researchers later repeated variations of the study across different countries and time periods. While the exact numbers changed, the core finding remained surprisingly durable. Humans are deeply influenced by what they believe everyone else believes. And here's where it gets strange. The effect became dramatically weaker when participants had just one ally, one person, one dissenting voice. That's all it took to make resistance much easier. So that's what happened in the lab, but the story doesn't stay in the lab, and that's exactly what we need to talk about next. Quick experiment. If you think you would have stuck with your own answer in Asch's study, type resistant. The same mechanism that made participants doubt their own eyes is the exact mechanism social platforms activate every time you open a comment section, check a like count, or see a trending topic. Also, brands know that your attention is heavily influenced by what the people around you appear to value. That's why social platforms prominently display likes, shares, comments, and friend activity. The moment you see your friends engaging with a video, it feels more important even though the content itself hasn't changed. The experiment never really ended. The room just got bigger. Instead of 8 actors sitting around a table, it's millions of people on a screen. Or at least, that's what it feels like. Your brain constantly asks 2 questions. What is true? And what do other people think is true? Most of the time, those questions point in the same direction. But when they don't, things get interesting. Social proof works the same way. When you're uncertain, other people's behavior becomes a shortcut, and platforms know it. Let's talk about different tactics that social media platforms use. Tactic 1, visible like counts. As discussed earlier, when thousands of people have already liked something, your brain receives a subtle signal. The content may genuinely be great, or it may simply look great because everyone else already approved it. The crowd becomes evidence. Tactic 2, comment consensus. Have you ever read comments before forming your own opinion? That's Asch's experiment in digital form. The first few highly visible comments often create the feeling that a consensus already exists. Once you see enough agreement, disagreeing starts to feel socially expensive. And here's where it gets strange. Sometimes people aren't reacting to the content itself anymore. They're reacting to the reaction. Tactic 3, trending topics. When something is labeled trending, your brain interprets it as socially important. Those aren't always the same thing. The label acts like a giant arrow pointing toward the crowd. Tactic 4, influencer consensus. One influencer sharing an opinion is interesting. 10 influencers sharing the same opinion creates the illusion of certainty, even when they all got the idea from each other. This is sometimes called an information cascade. This is especially powerful in influencer advertising. When several of your favorite creators start promoting the same product, you don't just become aware of it, you begin to assume it must be good. The repeated agreement acts as social proof, making the product feel more trustworthy before you've evaluated it yourself. Tactic 5, manufactured majority. This is the uncomfortable one. Bots, fake engagement, artificial comments. Purchase social proof, the digital version of filling Asch's room with actors. If enough signals point in the same direction, your brain often responds before it has time to investigate whether those signals are genuine. That's not stupidity. That's efficient social wiring encountering industrial-scale persuasion. The good news? Awareness changes everything. Once you understand that agreement and truth aren't the same thing, you start noticing the machinery. You stop treating popularity as evidence by default. You become harder to steer without realizing it. You're not someone these tactics work on without your knowledge anymore. You're someone who knows the playbook. And that changes the game entirely. The experiment may have started in a laboratory in the 1950s, but the real lesson only becomes visible when you bring it back into your own life. Think back to that moment from the beginning. You open a comment section, you see hundreds of people disagreeing, and suddenly your certainty starts wobbling. 10 minutes ago, that feeling might have seemed mysterious. Now you know what you're looking at. You aren't necessarily changing your mind because the crowd is right. Sometimes you're changing your mind because the crowd exists. That's the insight Solomon Asch handed us. The most powerful force in the room isn't always evidence. Sometimes it's consensus. And that doesn't make you irrational. It makes you human. The real takeaway isn't that crowds are dangerous. It's that crowds are powerful. Powerful enough to shape perception. Powerful enough to create doubt. Powerful enough to make obvious answers feel uncertain. But now you can see the mechanism. You're still a guinea pig. We all are. The difference is that you're now a guinea pig who can see the maze. And once you can see the maze, you move through it differently. If cracking open this experiment changed how you'll read comment sections, trending topics, and viral opinions this week, like and subscribe. Every week, we dissect another famous experiment and reveal the hidden playbook behind everyday human behavior. Guinea pigs, a symbol. And if this one got you, watch this next. How your boss gets you to do things you hate The Milgram Experiment. It's the perfect companion to this video because it reveals what happens when social pressure doesn't come from the crowd, it comes from authority. I'll see you there.